Welcome to the Ketogenic Diet Show. My name is Mary Beauchamp, and I'll be your hostess. Let's begin by taking a deep breath together. Take a moment to bring your awareness system into your body and into the present moment. Listen deeply to what your body has to say, because your body has all of the answers, and it's your job to tune in and listen. Your thoughts, your emotions, your feelings, and your actions are all instructing your immune system. In this podcast, I'll be exploring the history of human evolution, cultural anthropology, food systems, and the scientific literature, looking at patterns that can give us great insight into how we can live our lives today in a more aligned, integrated, and sustainable way. Here, I attempt to bridge the gap between the science and spirituality of self-healing. This is a process that requires deep self-reflection, which can lead to self-empowerment. My mission is to help as many people as I can to connect with their inner guidance system so that they can make truly informed decisions about their health. And in that process, they can awaken their body's innate intelligence to heal and thrive. When your mind and body are aligned, you are the boss of your emotional and physical health. Taking control of your health is a spiritual journey that requires you to look at what you eat as well as what is eating you. And when you do this, you can take the prescription pen out of your doctor's hand and write your own ticket to wellness. So now that you're fully present in your body, sit back, relax, and enjoy this information. See how it speaks to your body. Feel in and see how your body receives it. When the truth reveals itself to you, it will resonate in your body and you will know it. Then you can act accordingly based on the information you receive. It is totally possible to give your body messages that will consciously relay information to your biochemistry that can support your health and happiness.
So I didn't find science until a lot later on in life, after I had spent years on the road playing in a band, writing and recording music in recording studios, doing all different aspects of music, really. And then I found my way into acting, and that's why I moved to New York, because I found an agent who was willing to represent me. So it was really this amazing whirlwind. And when I got to New York, I became a personal trainer because the music industry, the acting industry is not notorious for steady income. So I started personal training, and then I realized I couldn't really get the results that I wanted for people without having a deeper understanding of nutrition. So I just started reading things on my own, nothing official or academic in any way. I just kind of went online trying to figure out what kind of tips I could pick up. And then I couldn't even pinpoint exactly what it was, but there were a few videos I came across that started to make me question my presumptions about nutrition, whether it was fasting or ketogenic style diets. This was probably back in 2014. And so that unraveled a lot of what I had previously thought and what the sort of societal dogma is about nutrition. And I quickly realized that I had as much of a passion for that. And maybe it was just because I like to figure out how and why things work. But once I realized that, I started to study on my own. And then eventually it landed me at the Nutritional Therapy Association, where I formally studied nutrition. And then just recently finishing the master's degree in clinical human nutrition. I just finished it a few months ago. So, and then, here I am. And now I feel like in some ways, as a practitioner, I feel like the advantage that I have is that I still carry all that creative side of my brain with me into the science field. So a lot of other people I run into have done science their whole lives. So they look at the world in a very reductive way. They look at it in a very nuts and bolts way. And I'm always thinking outside the box. I'm always asking why. I'm never accepting things, especially now, I never accept things for just the way they are. I'm always kind of looking to figure out if there's a better way to do things and finding creative ways. And so, I think that gives me a little bit of a unique perspective on nutrition compared to some people who have just kind of studied science their whole life. When I was in high school, I was terrible at science, to be perfectly honest. I was awful in chemistry. I was awful in all the sciences. I think it was mostly because I didn't really care. I thought I'm going to be a musician, so I don't need any of this. So it's just interesting now to look at my academic career later in life and realize, well, I guess if I had applied myself, maybe I could have done a little bit better in high school. But yeah, here we are. So that's the sort of Reader's Digest version of this long and winding road.
Okay. So what did you learn in all your studies? What sort of conclusions or, main ideas have you come across that really stuck with you that you feel are important enough to teach your clients and really promote in the world?
That's a great question. And I think of this a lot because I take it for granted now after 7 to 8 years of challenging my own beliefs. I take it for granted that people will just know some of the things that I know, right? Because I've spent all this time figuring it out. So when you spend too much time, that's why echo chambers are dangerous. You spend too much time in an echo chamber and you start to think that the rest of the world thinks that same way. And sometimes when I talk with a client or talk with the general public, I realize, oh, wow, we have a long way to go. I would say that the overarching theme that has shocked me the most and that has still sort of maintained in the public is that natural foods, natural fats, whether that be butter, tallow, lard, anything like that, anything natural tends to be either demonized or marginalized. And man-made foods like industrial seed oils, there's a whole litany of them, but anything that's sort of patented, created in a laboratory, and introduced into the food supply, say within the last 100 years, is touted as the way to health, the way forward, almost as if we can outsmart Mother Nature. And so it's actually shocking to me on almost every level, even on a pharmaceutical level. I have a lot of people who will take pharmaceuticals from a doctor without any hesitation. But if I talk about something like vitamin D, they're like, whoa, I don't know, but that seems kind of strange, or any vitamin or mineral, and they're very hesitant about that, but they won't have any problem at all taking a pharmaceutical. So I think that's the biggest shift I'm trying to make personally is to try to explain to people that a lot of these foods we've been eating for our entire existence, and that those foods aren't the experiment. It's the man-made foods that are actually the experiment. And some of them have only been introduced, again, within the last generation or two. So it's not very long. We don't know the long-term effects, but we're starting to see some of the repercussions, I think, in the chronic disease rates. And that's highly problematic. And I think we need to turn an eye to those foods and maybe think a little bit more critically about them.
Absolutely. That's great. I love that you're speaking about challenging your beliefs. I write a lot about this in my book, Radical Health Makeover, The Science and Spirituality of Self-Healing, which I just published. And the whole first half of the book is about belief systems and how we have to do that if we want to move forward with our health, because we've been so programmed, and the media basically owns the medical paradigm is running on the juice that it gets from the pharmaceutical industry, the media, the government, the FDA, the regulations, the guidelines. It's all a circle of influence that we are exposed to. And we don't realize how powerful that is until we try to unwind our health challenges and reverse our chronic diseases. And it really is interesting how people are so willing to give up their health and hand it over to their doctors in the white coats, because we've been programmed to believe that someone else is supposed to heal us, and they do that with medicine. And it really requires a significant amount of searching and soul searching and really rewiring our brain to come to a different conclusion that there's something else out there that's not outside of ourselves. And it's the constant seeking that people like you and myself are doing, and so much science out there that we can now rely on, which is also pretty shocking when you start to look at the evidence that's out there to back up this way of eating, that's not in alignment with the government guidelines, and how that's making us very, very sick in an epidemic proportions of chronic disease worldwide. So I really appreciate that you bring that up about, really challenging your belief systems, because we all have to do that to work through wherever we came from and how we got sick in the first place.
and this is to your point, I think that I'm finding a passion for education. I feel like when I sit one-on-one with people that while I can affect that one person and possibly that person's family if the message gets through, and when you impact one person, you likely impact others. But I have this desire to impact the population on a larger level. And then again, maybe this goes back to my dream as a young kid of being a rock star and influencing the world through music or through art in some way. And so I guess some of that has never left, and I still want to do that from a scientific perspective. And I think, again, your point is spot on. I'm so glad that you wrote a book about that, or at least the first part of the book. I'm so happy to be here having this conversation because I truly believe fundamentally that we won't be able to progress as a society if we can't have these long form conversations. We cannot rely on the nightly news to bring an expert, and I use that term loosely because I think I never want to refer to myself as an expert because I feel like when someone puts that label on you, it shuts off all the mechanisms of future learning. And so I don't like when people ask me things or people refer to me in some way. Well, you have a master's degree, and it doesn't matter. It's just a thing. I'm appreciative of it. I worked really hard for it, but it's just a thing. And it's just a thing that has gotten me further along the path. That's the only way I look at it. And so you can't allow a 30-second expert to come on and give a 30-second talk on something that's incredibly complex, that is so multifaceted, like the human immune system or the human body in general, and think that we can somehow ascertain exactly a one-size-fits-all approach for everybody. We have to be willing to entertain the fact that, maybe there's a lot we actually don't know. I mean, we still refer to part of our DNA as junk DNA. I mean, I think that highlights just how much humility we should have in the face of the human body. We're still learning things every day. I had some great professors that would say, all the time, well, we really don't know this and we really don't know that. And I actually appreciate that because it opens up new avenues for study. But you're right. I think there's this pervasive thought that we have arrived somewhere, that modern medicine is just so complete and it just knows everything. And I think, again, back to what I said earlier about the food, the modern medical experiment is, again, the experiment. The truth is there have been healing modalities that have been around for hundreds and thousands of years. And while they may not have the same kind of robust evidence in the medical literature, possibly because they're just not studied in that way, right? Because some of these things are natural. Again, they're not able to be patented and have exorbitant amounts of money made off of them. So I can leave that up to the listener to decide why certain things aren't studied. I have my own reasons for thinking that, but then we get to a place where we have to realize that this has only been since the early 1900s. Medicine radically changed after the Flexner report was published in 1911, I think it was, or 1910. And that sort of homogenized medicine into this one field, whereas before, people had the choice. They could see a homeopathic physician, they could see an empirical physician, they could see an allopathic physician, they could see, they had the choice to go to different modalities. And I think the future will actually combine all of them. I'm not anti-Western medicine. I think it has its place, especially in, I always say, if I was ever in a car accident, I don't think there's any place or time that I would rather be. They can literally put you back together again. That is miraculous, what they can do to the human body. But in terms of prevention, in terms of understanding the scope of disease, the power of nutrition, I think they are woefully lacking, but I also think that's intentional. I don't know many doctors who give the value that nutrition deserves. I know a few, and most of them have gone back to study nutrition after the fact because they realized just how little, every doctor I've talked to, they realize just how little nutrition training they get. My previous job was in a New York City hospital, and the doctors and the nurses were my clients. So I didn't deal with the patient population. My job was to improve the metabolic health of the doctors and nurses at the hospital. And when they would sit in my office, so many of them would say, I never knew that. I didn't study that in school. They studied biochemistry, but they didn't study, but they don't relate the biochemistry of food. They only think of the biochemistry of what a drug does or something like that. So it's very, very different. And I really try to shift mindsets, because I think that that's the ultimate way, again, to your point, is the ultimate way to move forward in this field, is to get people to think, okay, we don't know everything, so therefore I'm going to just remain open to everything. And that's hard, because we all have an ego, and I certainly have my biases, and I try to be very upfront with them. But I have many times in my life, I've changed the way I've thought about something, because I will self-experiment. I will force myself to look and think differently about something. And then in the end, I'll make an objective decision. Okay, no, I think actually I was right about this, or no, I think I want to dig a little bit deeper. And when I find something like that, I run with it. And sometimes I'll spend months to years working on something until I find a new perspective. And if we did that as a society, man, I truly believe we would have a different level of health, and we certainly wouldn't have chronic disease rates that are, verging on bankrupting our system. And that's where we are right now. So if that doesn't tell you that we need a paradigm shift, I'm not sure what does.
We definitely need a paradigm shift. And I think we're in the midst of it, whether we like it or not, because people are dying because they're so metabolically unhealthy. And we're seeing the consequences of following the guidelines and not heeding to the reality of the science, and it's not being brought forth. And so it's people like yourself that are going to bring that science forward and educate people. And, that's really what I tried to do by writing my book. It's like you said, I totally agree. Sitting one-on-one with people is fabulous, but it's not going to reach the amount of people that need this information fast enough. And so that's really what inspired me to write my book. So I hope that you do something like that with the knowledge that you have, because I can tell you're really passionate about it. And I'm personally fascinated with the idea of the biochemical impact of food. And again, that's what the second half of my book is about, is really how our food is informing our biochemistry. And I became very fascinated with that about 25 years ago. So I've been really going deep down that rabbit hole ever since. Just so grateful that so many doctors and scientists are now seeing and realizing and learning the benefits of these low carb diets and the ketogenic diet in particular, and how powerful that can be in reversing chronic illness. What we're seeing that reverses it is unrefutable. So it's a great time to be alive right now and to see all the changes happening. And it's definitely coming from the bottom up. It's not going to come from the top down. And if you want to really understand how your body can heal itself and how you can regain your health and take control of your health, it's probably not going to come from the guy in the white coat. This is a grassroots effort, and it's been hard, to plow this new path. And people have lost their licenses and been accused of all kinds of things that have, caused them to have to give up their practices. And it's ugly out there. What we're dealing with right now is, I'd love for you to just elaborate a little bit more on what your concept or picture is of the biochemical effects of the food that we eat, and how is it affecting our health and our biochemistry?
Yeah, I think there was a recent study, 2019 maybe, out of the University of North Carolina, that and they used some very advanced metrics to assess metabolic health. And they found in the United States that roughly 88% of the population was metabolically unhealthy.
Yeah.
And it's tragic and shocking when you think about that number, 88%. I mean, that means that 12% of us have any measurable level of health. And I don't think that would be possible without the radical change in our environment, including food, air, water. People talk a lot about chemicals like glyphosate, right? That's one that I've talked a lot about, because the industry tells us that it's not toxic to our biochemistry because we don't possess the pathway that glyphosate interrupts, right? That bacteria and plants possess this pathway. It's not dangerous to humans because we don't possess this pathway. And that's a very reductionist way of looking at it, because we have a microbiome and we consume these plants. And so the mechanisms of glyphosate impacting human beings, although they may be indirect, there's still a number of them. And I think that it's something that we have to really be careful of. It's why I tell people, people know, well, you should buy organic, but they don't really know why. And so I try to educate them on glyphosate and other pesticides. That's just one aspect of our environment that I think is I just gave a talk at a Nurses Day conference, and the talk was called, eating for your biology, avoiding evolutionary mismatches. And glyphosate is an evolutionary mismatch. The body doesn't really know what to do with it. And certainly the bacteria in our gut are heavily impacted by it. And I've yet to find any illness that doesn't have some relation to the gut. So there's so many different ways you can think about it. And I also think that food availability is a huge problem, meaning that our biology forever and a day was set up for feast and famine cycles, which is why when we're in a fasted state, we upregulate things like autophagy, cellular cleanup. We have the body has the mechanisms in place to help destroy potentially cancerous cells. We have all these endogenous inside ourselves, these endogenous systems that are meant to patrol, repair, and move forward. And these evolutionary mismatches create this scenario where those pathways are never upregulated. And so we have these runaway disease processes because the body just doesn't understand exactly what's going on. I tell people all the time, so you could take like a blueberry. Blueberries have all kinds of fantastic compounds in there, and they can be fantastic for health. But just because you can eat a blueberry or you can eat spinach 365 days a year doesn't mean that that's the healthiest thing. I think as humans, we think if a little of something is good, then a lot must be better. And so my approach is always sort of a seasonal approach. So, I don't, ketosis is a perfect example of something that I think was meant to be cyclical. Unless you're managing a disease, I don't think that people have to be in a deep state of ketosis 365 days a year. I don't think that's probably very evolutionarily consistent either. We have the luxury of choosing what kinds of foods we eat now because we can go to the supermarket and we can pick, but that's a very modern luxury. And I mean very modern. I mean, only within the past couple hundred years. I even tell people, just think about what life was like, just before refrigeration, when we were using salt, to keep things stable. So I just think we have to enjoy the advancements. I certainly don't want to live without electricity and without refrigerators. I'm not advocating going back to the Stone Age. But we do have to understand that our bodies sometimes can't keep up with how quickly our technology has changed. And I think there are some areas like food specifically that we would be better off having a more, people hear about the paleo diet, and there's a lot of merit to eating in that way. It's very seasonal, but I sort of combine a lot of different modalities. And I think, again, respecting our biology, respecting our biochemistry, and we're fighting against a food industry, let's face it, that is designed to hijack those systems. They understand it just as well as you and I do. And there are entire fields of science that are dedicated to hijacking that part of our biology. The field I'm most fascinated with recently is a field called psychophysics, which is actually the study of physical stimuli. Actually, I pulled the actual quote because I wanted to read it. It's the relationship between physical stimuli and the sensations and perceptions that they produce. It's super fascinating. And essentially, the food industry hires these physicists to study food optimization. So it's creating these things like bliss point, which is the perfect amount of salt, fat, sugar to make us want to continue to eat foods, even hijacking our own mechanisms of satiety. So they know how to manipulate our biology. So when people say, I just can't stop eating those foods, I tell them, oh, right, it's designed that way, which is why going to a whole food approach, whether you want to be ketogenic or not, doesn't really matter. The first step is getting to a whole food approach, because that eliminates that whole field of study. In fact, the gentleman Howard Moskowitz, who was one of the most famous sort of psychophysicists, he was employed by the U.S. Army to biohack soldiers into eating adequate amounts of calories because the rations weren't very palatable. So he designed more hyper palatable rations so that the soldiers would eat adequate calories. Now that's a situation where perhaps biohacking is a good thing because, soldiers need to eat adequate calories. But that has been applied now to things like cherry vanilla Dr. Pepper and, every kind of food imaginable in the market. I was in the supermarket the other day and I spent a Saturday night going through the cookie aisle, and I found Oreos. I found that there were 84 varieties of Oreos and 66 varieties of Pop-Tarts. But when you turn the package over, those foods are almost identical in their makeup, and it's a few dyes and a few things here and there that differentiate these flavors. So we have this perception that we have all this choice, and that by eating whole foods, we are somehow denying ourselves all, this plethora of food availability. But that's a farce. It's not. It's an illusion of choice, because all those foods are made up of the same core elements, those processed foods. And so I think that's the big pushback that we get from people saying, well, that's a very restrictive diet, but it's only restrictive from the lens of this, like, I call it a carnival-like atmosphere of food. And so I think it's important to reframe that, because we're not being restrictive by eating whole foods. We're eating an evolutionary consistent diet. And the last thing I'll say is your point on a bottom up approach to public health is something I've been just recently talking about. I don't think that agencies are coming to save us. Let's face it. I have been so disappointed by the FDA, the CDC, these organizations that when I was a kid, they were held up on a pedestal, and you thought, well, I mean, if the FDA or the CDC says so, they're there to protect us. And I think now we have to start to realize, especially in light of the last 2 years, we have to realize that there's no one coming to save us, and that public health, I firmly believe, will be a ground up, a grassroots approach when doctors start to return to more family style practices, stop practicing in these hospital systems that force them to practice in a certain way. They've lost the art of medicine, right? It's just an algorithm. It's a cookie cutter approach that an AI is eventually going to take over if they don't do something about it to save their own profession. And so that's what I do. I really I criticize my own field because I want it to improve. I don't want to see it the same way I found it. I always want to leave something a little bit different and better for me having been there. And that's how I feel about nutrition. That's how I feel about medicine. And I fully agree with you that I think a bottom-up approach is one of the most important things. We need to get that into our heads, that it's not an agency that's going to come fix us or wave a magic wand. It is us. We are going to do it. We have to return to a local way of eating, a local way of practicing medicine, nutrition, you name it. And that is when the system will change. And I think that is when you'll see reversals in disease rates.
Wow. That was amazing to hear you say all that. We have so much in common with our, just aligned in so many different ways I personally align in so many ways with what you just spoke. So thank you for reiterating that. It's so important that everybody hears that message. So thank you. So there's so many different directions we could go here. I'm curious, in what capacity are you working with people now? Are you in a clinical environment?
So actually, I just changed jobs for several reasons. I was in a hospital environment, and I was dealing with doctors and nurses. I've now switched to working for a company that has me doing sort of online virtual consults with people, which is great all around the country. Still not, because I work for a company, I have to, and it's I won't name the company, but it's a good company and aligns a lot with my values, but not 100%, which is probably impossible to find, as an individual. So I'm doing that as a job, but the ultimate goal is to, which is what I'm in the process of now, is to create a retreat center, which will also be sort of like an education center, an immersion therapy center where people can actually come up and stay, and they can take classes, they can have experiences, they can see what it's like to prepare real, actual whole foods, and why that can be delicious, and it doesn't have to be boring, and you don't have to eat terrible tasting food to be healthy. That is absolutely untrue, and that is back to what we originally said, is that the demonization of fat. Fat is one of the most amazing ways to flavor food. fat and salt, two things that they tell you if you stay away from, you'll be healthy. Ironically enough, are two of the mainstays of my diet. Salt is amazing. I use salt every day, high quality salt, very, very different from a full mineral spectrum salt and a table salt, and healthy fats. So I stay away from man-made fats, the canola oils, the sunflower oils, the soybean oils, all of those. But natural fats like butter, ghee, olive oil, tallow, lard, all those, I include those almost on a daily basis. So I want people to come up and be able to learn about those things, have the physical experience of tasting those foods, because there's a lot of people I feel like who have been, especially if they're born, I would say anybody, especially under the age of 30 today, would probably, they have a very different view of nutrition than I think a generation ago. And I wonder if some of them have even had a whole food, because they grow up, maybe they're a baby, they have formula, soy formula, and then the first foods they're eating are goldfish crackers, and then the next thing they're doing is they're having cereal for breakfast. And I often wonder if they've ever really had true, real whole foods. And so I don't think it's a surprise that we have children with allergies and with all kinds of different chronic diseases that maybe have a very similar etiology. And I would love to show people that these things are all, you expose people to a whole bunch of modalities and then hope that they take some of those things home. They won't take all of them home. They won't be able to live their life exactly the way they do at the retreat center for that weekend or week, but they can take some of the things, and maybe they find a yoga instructor near them because they really were inspired by the yoga classes that we taught, or maybe they were, we have we'll have trainers out there. We'll have people teaching, how to forage in the woods for edible food. We'll have people teaching acupuncture, nutrition, all kinds of things. And maybe someone takes one or two of those things back home and they really start to incorporate that into their life, and they help to improve their health, the health of their family, the health of their community. And again, that's this bottom-up approach. And that's really where I am now. I'm in this place where I'm not really one-on-one with people other than at my job, because I'm trying to put all my energy into creating this retreat center. And the first one will be, so I don't have the place for it yet, the permanent home, but decided with my business partner, we decided to put on a retreat at the end of 2022 in October on Martha's Vineyard, so that we could sort of have this immersion exposure, and people could get a feel for what it's going to be like when it's actually probably going to be in the woods of the Northeast of the United States, New Hampshire, Maine, Vermont, something like that. So it's going to be very exciting. I think we also need that return to the real world, right? We're all trapped in the virtual world, and I think the powers that be sort of like it that way. It's a lot less of a human experience. Again, love technology, wouldn't want to live without it, but there's a balance that we have to strike. And so that's my ultimate goal, is to bring people into the real world so that people can shake hands, hug each other, look each other into the eye, and be able to have a more immersive experience than just through some kind of technology.
I love that. We both have a passion for face-to-face, real human experiences, and I've been a fan of retreats for over 20 years and hosted many of them and plan to do more as well. So I hope to be at one of your retreats maybe someday. That sounds amazing.
Love to have you.
Yeah, excellent. So, okay, so what, give us an idea of what you eat in a day. And we obviously have some similarities with the ketogenic diet and understanding the importance of autophagy and detoxification and things like that. So how do you incorporate that into your own life?
It's a great question. And I think for me, it's also constantly evolving, which is, again, I always think of things through the evolutionary lens. So fasting is a big part of what I do. It's not, and the beauty of fasting is that anybody can incorporate it in any way, right? So, and for different stages of life, it's not always appropriate. For instance, I wouldn't necessarily say that a woman who's pregnant or nursing, fasting doesn't make any sense, and it wouldn't have made sense in an evolutionary sense, which is, again, why I'm not a one-size-fits-all kind of practitioner. But I do think that, again, because of food availability, I think fasting is one of those things that's considered a fad and considered some kind of strange thing, but really it's just the way we've lived our entire lives. And the more recent 6 meals a day plus snacking is the fad. And that's the silliness of not understanding our biology. We're not meant to eat that way. I don't know many people who do well in the end that way. Most people who eat that way tell me that if they don't have a meal every couple of hours, they get brain fog and they get irritable. And I start to think about what a disadvantage that would be in nature. If you had to eat every couple of hours, you would never have survived. So that is your biology now has been hijacked. We need to return you to a place where just even a modest amount of time away from food is appropriate. It helps heal the gut lining. It helps, again, upregulate things like autophagy. We have this amazing process called the migrating motor complex, which actually helps clean out our GI tract, but that's really only upregulated in a fasting state. So I incorporate fasting just enough to have some of those processes upregulated, and sometimes I do longer fasts, but most of the time I'm just taking a reasonable amount of time away from food. You can even still eat 3 square meals in, say, an 8-hour eating window. It is not difficult. Although I will say, if you start to eat more nutrient-dense foods, 3 meals a day is a little rare for me now. But once upon a time, when I ate sort of the standard American diet, it was, cereal for breakfast, a sandwich for lunch, and it was, some kind of pasta, bread, something, for dinner. And then you had to have snacks. And so I remember the way I used to eat, and it's kind of shocking, actually, when I think about the way I eat now. It's a real 180. And so most of my diet, I would say, it's animal based. I believe that meat, especially red meat, is one of the healthiest things we can consume. I also consume organ meats, and a lot of people don't think those are very palatable, but there are a lot of ways you can, liver pate is one of the most delicious ways you can sneak liver into your diet. A lot of companies now make ground beef with organs ground in, so you don't even know they're in there, which is another fantastic way. You can just make burgers on the grill, but you're getting liver, heart, and kidney in there. And trust me, I've fed it to people unsuspectingly, and they had no idea. And when I told them, they were quite happy. They were like, "Oh wow, I didn't think I could eat organ meats." And there you go. It's just a great way to sneak them in. So animal based. I do a lot of raw dairy, which is actually illegal where I live, but I get it from a local farm. So as long as you get it from a farm, fine. You just can't buy it in a grocery store. I don't do a lot of milk. It's mostly yogurt and kefir. And then I eat seasonal vegetables and fruits. So, I certainly don't shy away from those foods, but I do try to eat them in a seasonal manner. And I do try to be very aware that plants have a lot of benefits, but they also have defense mechanisms. Unlike animals who have teeth and claws and they have locomotion, they can run away from you. They can defend themselves. Plants have to be more subtle in how they defend themselves, and they produce chemicals that prohibit digestion. They produce chemicals that do all kinds of things in the human body, and to some degree, they can be a positive stress on us, in small amounts. So I'm not one of those people that thinks you should avoid all plant products because they have toxins. I think that's, again, a little bit reductionist. If you're managing a disease, perhaps you might want to stay away from them for a time being, which is why the carnivore diet can be very healing for a lot of people. But I think that I like to incorporate some vegetables, usually non-starchy vegetables. I tend to feel better with those. And you get a little bit of exposure to some of those plant chemicals, that's called a hormetic response, where hormesis is sort of like a little bit of a toxin is actually beneficial. It teaches the body to be able to handle those things. And then fruits, so this time of year, we're recording this at the beginning of June. And so, there are lots of, fruits that are starting to come into season. And so I'll certainly eat those. I'm also very active. So, my carbohydrate intake, I don't really worry about that much anymore. Because I'm so active. But I think carbohydrates, again, shouldn't be feared, but I always like to have them in, commensurate with physical activity. So if you're very, very active, you can certainly handle more carbohydrates. They are a fast burning fuel source. But if you're going to be sitting 8 to 10 to 12 hours a day, perhaps you shouldn't base your diet on carbohydrates because they have to go into storage if they're not going to be used for energy. So I steal Ben Bickman's line a lot, and I say prioritize protein. That's one of my favorites. And then you can choose your fuel source based on what you like. I happen to really love fats. I think they're very satiating. I think, I don't go overboard. when I first started all this, I used to put, chunks of butter into my coffee. And that was sort of my introduction into all that before I really understood, okay, maybe that's not exactly how I want to approach this. Because calories still do matter. It's just that we don't have to count them, and it's very difficult to count them and almost impossible to understand energy expenditure on any real accurate level. So the beauty is when you start to eat real foods, they satiate you. They tell you when to stop. You don't have to use a calorie calculator to tell you when to stop. That's unsustainable at best. I work with people all the time who tell me, I just don't feel full, but I'm at my calorie limit. And I say, well, that tells you everything you need to know. Our ancestors didn't have calorie calculators, but they all somehow stayed lean. So let's rethink the process. It's not the calories don't count. It's just that we shouldn't count them. So that's my general approach. And I think it sort of varies, in the season. I tend to do things like bone broth and more fasting in the winter. And I tend to eat a wider variety of foods in the spring and summer when they're just more seasonally available.
So do you ever check your ketones and blood sugar? Do you monitor that at all?
I did a lot in the past. I haven't done it much anymore, but I just got a brand new meter, and I'm on the lookout for what I really want to do is I want to get a continuous glucose monitor to run a little bit of an experiment. I'm obsessed with those. For those people who don't know, you can finger stick yourself and you can get an instant time, a real-time blood sugar reading, which is great. It gives you some information, but it's also just a snapshot in time. A continuous glucose monitor is something that sort of gives you it gives you a 24-hour tracking of your blood sugar. So you can see how everything impacts it. And that's a lot better than pricking your finger 600 times a day, right? If you want to see how a meal impacts you, or you want to see how exercise or stress, or I know someone who was wearing a continuous glucose monitor and found out that their morning commute spiked their blood sugar more than some of their meals because their commute was so stressful. So their blood sugar went up into the 120s during a morning commute, and that really was shocking to them. And I said, even if we need to do something, you need to listen to either your favorite podcast, or you need to listen to music or something calming on your way to work, because you're having a blood sugar excursion equal to a meal or even greater than a meal that's full of carbohydrates. And if you're doing that every single day of your life, while you're driving to work 5 days a week, that could have long-term detrimental effects. So those are just really, really cool key, indicators of how your lifestyle is impacting your physiology. So yes, I used to check a lot. I don't do it as much, but my goal is to get back onto that. And actually, during the retreat, I'm actually hoping to find a company that I can get a CGM, put it on there, so that it's something I can introduce people to, because I think it's a very valuable tool, and I think it gives a lot of insight.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of tracking ketones and blood sugar, and really developing that sort of dialogue with the biochemistry, so how the environment is affecting you and how your food's affecting you. And otherwise, we just don't see the whole picture. And I feel like it's such a service to people to be able to see how A equals B, and how doing, this equals that. And it's such a valuable exercise. And we, in other countries, they give out blood sugar monitors for free. My daughter lived in Germany, and she says, yeah, the doctor gives them out to people for free. And I think what would happen in America if doctors gave people blood sugar meters to take home? I mean, it would be such a revelation for people to see how their food affects their blood sugar. And so I'm a big fan of that. And I've never checked mine with a continuous glucose monitor. I have a desire to get one as well. And I think it checks your sugars every 30 seconds, maybe every minute. I don't know, but it's often throughout the day, something you could never manage without a continuous monitor on your skin, right? So they sort of apply to the skin, and then it's checking every minute or half a minute or something. So that is some information that would really be a game changer for so many people. And I think it's a really valuable exercise. I teach all my clients how to use a blood sugar ketone monitor for that reason. And I do believe that personally, going into a ketogenic state or state of nutritional ketosis, however you want to look at that, is very valuable. Could be seasonally, could be monthly, could be weekly. Some people do it daily. But this is really where we get the housekeeping effects, the cleanup, the autophagy, removal of, dead and mutated DNA and things like that don't belong in the body, and also really accelerates healing. And so I feel like for people to learn how to trigger their biochemistry into a state of ketosis is such a valuable tool for a lifetime of healing and detox. So I'm a big fan of teaching people how to do that, so they can then leverage that skill for the rest of their life, really, for their own healing. You check your blood sugar. Do you check your ketones?
Yep, I have a monitor that does both.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, and there's some fascinating research coming out about the organs like the heart and even the brain. We're always told that glucose is the preferred fuel source of the brain. And, I don't like the word preferred, because I feel like that's anthropomorphizing the human body, as if the body decides, well, I like carbohydrates better. These are just biochemical processes. And again, there's some interesting research coming out that I've read a few preprints that even in the presence of glucose, that ketones are actually utilized preferentially. So I think we're kind of going to blow up the whole field of metabolism soon. The heart very often, is misunderstood in the fact that, people say low fat diets are heart healthy, but the truth is that since the heart doesn't have very much in the way of glycogen stores, or it can't store glucose, that fatty acids and ketones are actually an incredibly efficient fuel source for the heart. And if you look in any biochemistry textbook, it will tell you straight up that fatty acids are, again, the preferred fuel source of the heart. I don't like using that word, but even in the presence of glucose, even though the body does burn glucose first, that's because glucose can become toxic at too high levels. So I'm not sure that it's a preference more than a defense mechanism. But again, there's some research coming out on ketones in the brain, ketones in the heart, and it's coming out fast and furious, and it's telling us that these organs their metabolism of ketones and fatty acids may be different than we originally thought, which I think is fantastic. Again, it speaks to your point of if we're eating in a seasonal manner, I think people don't realize how often they probably are in ketosis, because they're not even a mild state of nutritional ketosis after an overnight fast, just simply eating dinner at 8 o'clock at night, and maybe somebody that goes for a run in the morning but doesn't eat before they run because they don't like how they feel. I'm going to almost guarantee you that you have some level of measurable ketones at that point. So it's not some bizarre thing. It's not something to be afraid of, like, diabetic ketoacidosis. It's not the same. And so I think people don't realize, again, these are just normal physiological states. We label them, and then celebrities get a hold of them, and we start to think this or that is a fad, but it's just simply not true. It's just a biochemical state of the human body. And as you said, I think it's been preserved over time for a reason. I know that my brain works. I can feel the difference cognitively when I run on ketones. But having that metabolic flexibility is awesome, because now as an athlete, I can utilize glucose as a fuel source. But then when that's, if it's an endurance event, if that fuel source is gone, which inevitably it will, I don't have to stop. Like when I go to the gym, I see people with their gels and their Gatorade, and they've always got to be supplying themselves with sugar, because that's what their metabolism is based on. But I have, over the years, have made myself metabolically flexible to be able to use glucose, but also be able to use fatty acids and ketones. So when that fuel runs out, I don't even notice the transition into utilizing fats. And so my workouts they can be longer, and they can have the same intensity the whole way. I just tend to need less rest. It's really a noticeable difference from prior to that, when I used to work out, and I could tell that I was running out of steam, and that just doesn't happen anymore. So I feel like I'm cheating. It gives me an advantage when I'm, say running a 5K or something, and I see other people stopping for things, and it's interesting to me. I just think, wow, if you only understood the fact that the body is perfectly capable of handling this situation, you're not suffering from a lack of Gatorade. You're suffering from a lack of metabolic flexibility. And so it's just an interesting thing to note. And I think if people if they tested more, they'd realize, oh, wow, I'm actually in a state of ketosis every once in a while, even if it's mild. I think most people do achieve that, unless they're waking up at 3 a.m. and having a Snickers bar. Most likely they're going to be in some kind of mild state of ketosis.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned Ben Bickman. He's one of my absolute favorite people to listen to. And if you don't know Ben Bickman, you should follow him if you're listening to this, because he's incredible. And one of the things that he said and says often is that ketones are not an alternative fuel source, that they are the preferred fuel source, not only for the heart, but also for the brain. And we know this with all of the studies coming out with Alzheimer's, dementia, and, mental illness. The effects that it has on the brain and cognitive function are tremendous. So it's just a mindset shift that we weren't designed to be fueled constantly with carbohydrates. And babies, of course, newborns are in and out of ketosis within 20 minutes. They may feed, and then a half an hour, 20 minutes later, they can be in ketosis. And
Right.
humans, it may take 48 hours to get into ketosis. I know sometimes for myself, that's the case where I may have had some carbohydrates and then, want to switch over to ketones, and I'm checking my blood sugar and my ketones. So I know sometimes and I'll have to fast and work fairly hard at getting back into ketosis after some carbohydrate indulgence. So yeah, I appreciate you bringing up Ben Bickman. He's amazing. And he always has amazing things to say about this whole journey with the science behind the ketogenic diet. So I'm sure you have your other favorite scientists and doctors that you follow. Maybe you could share a little bit more about that with us. Who's your favorite people that you follow?
Boy, at this point, there's been so many people that I've come across over the years. I'm trying to think. Ben Bickman, in terms of metabolism, is definitely one of my favorites. I'm trying to think of who else. I'm just drawing a blank because I truly, it's funny. I get into these moments where I start to go down certain rabbit holes, and if I'm studying one thing in particular, and reading through PubMed, I'm able to find new researchers that I never came across before, and study their work. But yeah, geez, I don't know. Off the top of my head, I don't. For some reason, I don't have anybody immediately that comes to mind. But
that's okay.
Yeah.
Have you read D. Nicolantonio's book? It's called
one.
Win.
There's one. I have not read that book. I read The Salt Fix originally a long time ago, and I thought that was amazing. I thought his take on salt was one of the first things that made me rethink that whole paradigm. So again, yeah, you have these moments where you run into people and they just sort of slap you upside the head and say, "Hey, you got to think differently." And I really appreciate that. So yeah, James D. Nicolantonio is another one that I think is fantastic. Dr. Mercola is another one who probably, he's been studying things since the 90s, vitamin D and all kinds of things. So I really appreciate a lot of his work. It's funny, it's sad that a lot of the doctors, probably why I'm not thinking of it in terms of health is because over the past 2 years, I've been trying to, help people get to the bottom of the current, I just call it everybody's favorite virus, and studying a lot of the doctors that, shockingly continually are censored. And, from a bigger picture perspective, I think that's one of the most dangerous games we could play right now is censoring any kind of academic conversation around anything. And I don't care if you want to say it's dangerous to public health to have certain information out there. I, for one, never think information is dangerous. The answer to, incorrect information is just more information. So a lot of the doctors that I've been reading research on lately have been a lot of the heavily censored doctors. And I think that's highly problematic because if we don't come together as a field, we're never going to progress. Dr. Mercola, I guess the reason I thought of that is because he's been heavily censored, despite the fact that he's just analyzing the science. And I'm very dispassionate about this. I have no dog in the fight. Why? I used to tell people, if I found out through the research and through practical application that eating cardboard was the way to live to 200 years healthy, I would be advocating the cardboard diet. It's just very simply that easy for me. I just look at what the research says, and I look at what happens in my own body, and I say, okay, that's what we're going to do. I have no dog in the fight, I like to say. There's just no plant-based, animal-based. I don't care what the personal feelings are. I just want to know what the research says and what the biochemistry does in the human body. So I hope that people get that from my work. I really try. I'm upfront with my biases. I tell people what I eat, but I've only come to that conclusion because of the research. I didn't start there and then try to twist the research and pervert it into some way that will fit my pre-existing paradigm. It's not that way. It's the complete opposite. That's why I love Ben Bikman. He just goes where the evidence goes, and I think very often you hear people say, well, I follow the science. And I think most of the people who say that have actually never read any actual scientific literature. CNN is not science. Fox News is not science. They are just mouthpieces. And as you said before, they all have their own vested interest in who pays the bills, who keeps the lights on. So I'm sorry, but you need to read the scientific literature if you want to know what the science actually says. And that's where we are. We just have to take that power, we have to retain that power for ourselves to be able to educate ourselves. We cannot rely on other people to do it for us.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you brought that up. That's so important, that what we're seeing in the media, the mainstream media, is all being censored, and it's all be directing us to support the paradigm that's false. It's the false narrative of what we're being fed. And we could go on and on about what's happened in the last 2 years, but like you said, you mentioned some doctors that are being censored. I've been censored. Everyone I follow on some level is being censored and will be censored if we don't change what is going on. And I hope that the medical community is going to come to that conclusion. Also on its own, that what's happening is unacceptable, and that the only way science doesn't exist unless you can question what it says. And that's what makes science science and biased. And if we don't have that encouragement, it's going to skew everything, medicine for sure. But also just the public health is going to suffer in such a huge way. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. It's an interesting time to be around right now, trying to present the science in a way that isn't going to be censored. So that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this podcast, because I can't speak what needs to be spoken on the social media platforms. So I'm hoping that this will be a better way to get the word out, the truth out, essentially. And so thank you for bringing that up. So with respect to the science, and you are one of those people that looks at the science and is studying the scientific evidence, can you speak a little bit about veganism and vegetarianism and sort of the propaganda that we're all being fed with the Game Changers and all these different documentaries that are coming out, theoretically proving that this way of eating is what the human body is designed for?
Yeah, so things like Game Changers are similar to what I mentioned before about watching the nightly news and thinking that that's science. There was virtually no science in that film. It was well done, and it was a well-crafted piece of I guess there's no other word to use than propaganda, because they had a bias going in, and they were trying to make it seem to the layperson that this is how science is done. It's not how science is done. And again, I don't, on either end of the spectrum, carnivore, vegan, I look at the work of someone like Weston A. Price, and he actually didn't find any vegan tribes ancestrally or any fully carnivorous tribes. Again, I think we have this luxury because of the modern way we live our lives. So we can choose to have our food shipped from all over the world. So we can choose to be vegan, or we can choose to avoid plant products, but our ancestors wouldn't be choosing to do anything. They would eat whatever was available. So if maybe a tribe would eat more plant-based, but if there were bugs or insects around, they would eat them. And if a carnivorous tribe that subsisted mostly like the Maasai warrior in Africa, they subsisted mostly on the blood, meat, and milk of their animals. But if they could have something like honey, or if they could grow something, or they found something wild, a tuber or something, they would eat that. They would not say, I am a carnivore, therefore I don't eat this, or I am a vegan, therefore I don't eat that. I worry about the vegan diets long term, because there are nutrient deficiencies. Even some of the famous vegan doctors on their websites have a list of supplements you should be taking. So to me, that answers the question. Well, obviously this isn't, if you can't get it all from food, now admitting that our food is not as nutritious as it used to be because of our farming practices and because of soil depletion of nutrients. So yes, maybe today, and I take some supplements, because I do think that our food and our water isn't as complete nutritionally as it used to be. But if you need a litany of supplements to be able to sustain a certain diet, I would say that you should probably question that diet. If it's an ethical concern, I would also say you need to look at the work of certain Center for Biological Diversity, I think, put out this amazing paper on the amount of animal death that goes into crop agriculture. So there is no form of diet that doesn't require death. There is no form. Vegan diets require death. Obviously, animal-based diets require death. So then it comes down to you choosing whether you think small animals don't deserve to live, but big animals do. And then you're just getting into sort of parsing out your belief system. So we have to accept that. That's the objective reality, that there is no diet, that, the ecosystems that are disrupted by monocropping are vast. And I'm not even sure we understand the full negative impact on the earth. So people talk about the environmental concerns. Well, I'm sorry, but greenhouse gases, they always say, well, we need to, the cows and the greenhouse gases. And I think, I haven't looked at it recently, but I looked at it a couple of months ago. I think I looked at the EPA data, and I think it was something like only 11% came from agriculture. And I think of that 11%, only 40% of that was from animal agriculture. So 60% of the 11% was actually from crop production and greenhouse gases. So even if you are of the mind that CO2 is inherently dangerous, which that's a whole other conversation, animal agriculture is not the problem. We're not going to, if your goal is to reduce CO2, which again, I'm not necessarily in favor of, then dealing with animal agriculture is not going to, it's not going to help. It's not going to change anything. I'm a big fan of organic animal agriculture and sustainable agriculture, and I'm not an advocate for factory farming, and I don't want to support that because I don't think it's right for the animals. I don't think the food is as nutritious. So I don't like to put myself in any one camp, because I really do see all the sides of the argument. I understand a vegan wants to minimize suffering. I just think they're not educated as to how many animals and ecosystems are destroyed, especially if we put the entire world on a vegan diet. I mean, we could lose vast populations of animals. They're just too small to see sometimes. So I think it's really important to understand that nuance. And I do think that, I think also a vegan diet that is replete with things like plant-based meats, make-believe foods. These are foods that can be patented. You can't grow them, you can't eat them. So you have to be very careful. If you're a vegan, you may be contributing to your own loss of food sovereignty. You are now outsourcing your food. You are now relying on the supermarket to provide you with all the food that you require to be on your chosen diet. And in the next, I would say the rest of 2022, the world population has to be very aware of supply chain issues and food shortages. We have several events going on from a geopolitical perspective that are going to impact food availability. So to think that you're going to be able to go to the grocery store and pick the foods that represent your vegan diet indefinitely going into the future, I think is naive. So I think you best understand your local producers, even if that's, I'm not saying you have to eat red meat, but you want to find a local producer of eggs. You want to find a local producer of some raw dairy. You want to make sure that your food sovereignty is intact, because if what happened at the beginning of 2020 is we saw some supermarket shelves were bare because supply chains bottlenecked. Well, we may be heading into something even more dangerous than that in the near future. And so I tell people, it's not about what you want to do on a cognitive level. It's what you need to do to survive. And I think people's habits will change very quickly if they're presented with no food options. I think all of a sudden, those chosen diets, we then revert back to what our ancestors were, which were, we don't get to make those choices. We eat whatever is available. And if that means, it's an animal product, then it's an animal product. And if you're a carnivore and it's a plant-based product and it's a vegetable or a fruit, you're going to eat that because you don't have the choice anymore. So it's going to be an interesting time in history to see what kind of personal paradigms fall by the wayside if put into a certain position.
Yeah, that's super great that you brought that up. I mean, our survival really depends on us having a food supply chain that we wouldn't say have control over, but at least we're fundamentally connected to. So I encourage everybody listening, go meet a farmer, go visit their farm, shake their hand, look in their eye, look up the Weston A. Price Foundation, look for a chapter in your area, meet your local farmers, go to the farmers market, shop at the small tiendas, shop at the farmers market and the small organic grocery stores and small markets, because that's what you can rely on when the big supply chain shut down, if that happens. And we know that it has, and it can, and it might be close to happening again. So that's our best insurance for our health is to either be a farmer or become very good friends and support your local agriculture. That is what it's all about right now, and really always has been, but it was so easy before that we didn't have to think about it, and now we really need to think about the importance of doing that. So thanks for bringing that up. That's so important.
I think the diet wars are over at this point. I think there's a much bigger problem looming, and that's the message I try to get across. We have to stop arguing about that, and we have to protect our food sovereignty. Yeah. That's the message I'm trying to get across. I don't even engage people anymore that want to argue the vegan, the carnivore. It's such a non-issue right now. If you're still arguing that, you have a lack of understanding of the bigger picture right now.
Absolutely. So true. Thank you for bringing that up. It's so important. Yeah, I really agree with you 100% on this, Jay. So, well, I know that we're out of time. So I just want to thank you again so much for coming. You brought up so many valuable points that I absolutely align with, and I feel are so important to be sharing right now into the world. And so thank you for being a voice, a mouthpiece for the universe, because everybody needs to hear this, and it's so important. So thank you again. And if there was one thing that you might want to leave people with, just a little tip or suggestion or I don't know, anything that is most meaningful that you might want to leave people with, what might that be?
Well, aside from what we just talked about, protecting your food sovereignty, I think the word that I've been in love with lately is curiosity. Don't allow the curiosity that you had, as a child. Every child is curious, right? I think every child's favorite word is why, and that was certainly my favorite word. Curiosity is what initiates the scientific method. It's what initiates most things in the human existence, I think. And so retain that curiosity, however that is for you. If that means going into the woods and just sort of marveling at what's around you, or trying to understand how or why the human body works, or trying to understand how and why you react to a certain situation in a certain way, maybe managing your stress response, just that curiosity to keep you moving forward. Because I think progress dies when curiosity dies. And so I think if we just as a society retain that curiosity and some humility in the face of what we don't know, because there's a lot that we don't know. I can tell you from a scientific perspective, there is more that we don't know than we know, which is, I think to most people that will be shocking, but that's the truth. There is so much we've still yet to discover. And the only way we will discover it is if we ask the questions why and keep that curiosity alive. So, think of curiosity like a little flame. If you want to keep that fire going outside, you need to keep the embers burning. You want to keep that curiosity going, and I think it will. And then just follow where it leads, because everybody's different. That's the beauty of it. If everyone's curious about something different, then we all get to learn from other people. So my focus is nutrition and health, but somebody else may be curious about something else, and I just love educating, but I also love learning. So keep the curiosity alive, and I think society benefits as a whole if we all sort of embrace that concept.
That's fabulous. Yeah, science dies when curiosity dies. There's no science without questioning everything and really supporting that. So that is, in essence, the problem with censorship in general, is that It shuts down our curiosity, and it shuts down looking at things from a different point of view than what you believe is true. And if we don't question our belief systems and we don't question everything, we are not going to move forward, and as a society, or certainly in the medical community as well. You can find me at ketogenicdietcoach.com, where you can find out more about my program called Radical Health Makeover. This will help you get keto adapted so you can live your life more fully. This is a 1-year mastery course that includes private coaching sessions with me that you can actually start today. You are not a victim of your genetic code. If you're looking to reverse symptoms of leaky gut, chronic inflammatory conditions, autoimmunity, cancer, or if you just want to maximize your athletic performance or age more gracefully, training your metabolism to burn fat for fuel instead of just carbohydrates is a powerful strategy. I encourage you to pick up a copy of my book, Radical Health Makeover: The Science and Spirituality of Self-Healing, which will give you a solid foundation for taking control of your health. In it, I've outlined specific strategies that you must take with your diet, as well as important daily practices that will help you to leverage the power of your mind in your healing process. You'll also find my free ebook that you can download called How to Start a Keto Diet the Right Way: The 3 Must-Do Steps for Success, along with my free 5-day keto challenge that will teach you everything you need to know about tracking your progress. This is crucial for being successful with a keto diet. You have to learn how to track your biometrics and so that you can learn the language of your body. I know this sounds daunting, but I will walk you through this whole process and I will simplify it for you and help you to avoid the common pitfalls and problems that I see so often that people are making that's really derailing them from having success. I don't want that to happen to you. So do reach out to me on my website. You can send me a message and let me know how I can support you on your keto journey.